Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So simple.
Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast episode review for May 6th, 2023. I am Brendan Cassidy.
And I'm Ryan McQuaid.
Thanks for joining us this week, everyone, for this review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Ryan, you're my guardian. I'll just say that right now.
And you're my rocket raccoon.
I like that better, actually. That one's pretty good. I'll take a lot of pride in that.
We are InSession Film?
We are InSession Film. We are. We're rocketing InSession.
I am InSession.
For those of you listening, for a little inside baseball, Ryan and I we're recording this a bit earlier in the morning than we usually do, so you might get our bassy voices for this.
You might get the sexy low voice from the Midnight Express.
Yeah, maybe not quite as sexy as Bradley Cooper's voice as Rocket Raccoon, but we'll.
That knocks your socks off. All right. Yeah,
I mean,
a lot about Brendan this morning.
It's one description. It certainly has a lot of emotionality to it. We'll talk about that.
Right.
But yeah, thanks for being here, Ryan. I'm looking forward to talking about this this new movie here, this new Marvel movie, which has been getting a lot of buzz from a lot of our friends and fellow critics out there. Some mixed responses overall, but a lot of people seem to be really batting 1,000 for this one, and I'm looking forward to getting into what we have to say about that. As we gear into this, I think maybe the first thing we should do, Ryan, is talk about our feelings with regard to James Gunn, maybe how we felt about his relationship with Marvel, because there were a lot of circumstances leading into the making of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And for a little context, there was a point in, what year was that? Maybe 2018 or something, where he was fired from the production before the cast themselves bat for him. And he was brought back. Of course, there was also a pandemic to contend with. There's also James Gunn's newly found history with DC Studios. Of course, we know all about that. All around making Guardians Volume 3 when he was brought back. So there were a lot of circumstances. So I guess what thoughts do you have on that? And even just around James Gunn in general as a filmmaker, because he's one of the few filmmakers in the MCU that I feel like has made movies that really feel distinctly his own, at least when compared to the Marvel machine.
Yeah, I think that James Gunn is the best filmmaker that the MCU's ever had.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I think that at least within their own universe. Now, they've had 32 movies. I mean, he's no John Watts, actually, to be fair. Because we all know John Watts as this auteur.
John Watts is an auteur, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? He's really, the Scorsese of our time. And,
and to be fair, I like two of those Spider-Man movies that he did.
Yeah,
I like the first one, and I really like No Way Home. I think it's a good movie.
Yeah, I mean they're good movies. I mean, like, cinematically speaking and visually speaking, an eyesore. But I don't know
if I go. Maybe not the greatest, but I don't know if I go that far.
I mean, like they don't look great. Like there's not like a shot I take out of those movies and I'm like, oh, that's the director right there.
They're not, like, at the very least, they're not as colorful as the Guardians of the Galaxy films.
I'm being too mean on him because honestly, the real star of the visual lens is Peyton Reed. So it's just, I mean, right?
Now, and I'm someone that kind of went to bat for Quantumania. I didn't hate that movie.
I know. I'm totally kidding aside, and that's the point.
Yeah,
the point of that is to say that when you see a director that has a vision, like a Coogler, even Waititi, even
I'd say
Taika,
Chloe Zhao. Chloe Zhao for sure. For better or for worse for many, many people, but that was very much her vision in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think then, even Branagh's Shakespearean sensitivities.
I love that first Thor.
Kind of lend into the first Thor and building that world out,
Joe Johnston and the first Captain America. Basically redoing the Rocketeer.
Yeah, I mean, like if you know the directors behind their work, it lends to, I think, a better theatrical experience rather than
Sure.
just hiring some random AI generated name, Peyton Reed, John Watts,
Oh
these,
my god. I don't
Anthony
want to
and
use
Joe Russo,
I
you
don't
know
want
what I
to use
mean?
the words AI on this podcast anymore. I feel like the AI might be listening.
Well, I mean, the Russo brothers are totally for it. It seems like. Anyway, that's how the gray man was invented.
Oh
But anyway,
gosh, yeah.
that's beside the
That's
point.
how Ghosted was made too.
Oh God! Thank God we never have to talk about that. That was such a bad movie. Oh my God. Anyway, poor Dexter Fletcher.
I know.
All right. But James Gunn, yeah, I think he's the best of the best. That being said, I don't think like he's batting 1,000 for me as like a director. Like his
Yeah.
last movie, The Suicide Squad, I did not like that movie.
I
thought
did
that
not
movie.
either. I'm with you on that.
I think that movie was really not within his wheelhouse, if that makes sense. And I thought that like it's. I think the thing about James Gunn is he's very hit or miss because of his
Sure.
sense of humor. I think his sense of humor can either be really, really good for some things, and then for other things, you're like, I don't need to see you do. Essentially, with the Suicide Squad, this movie, like
Mhm.
the Guardians all over again. Like it just felt like he was retreading himself, and it is a little worrisome. I think for him taking over DC, I think that you can have a little bit of work. I don't think it's like 100%. I'm bought into this idea, but I think he's
Right.
I think storytelling wise, and in just from a visionary standpoint, I think he's actually what DC needs because he knows from Marvel how to craft a continuous story. He knows the importance of story. He knows the importance of characters, and he's got a lot of love for these characters. He's a superhero guy. He knows what he's
Mhm.
doing, and he's very reliable. So I can understand why Zaslav and those people over at DC just kind of just gave him the guidance to do because
Yeah.
otherwise it's Zack Snyder and a bunch of like poisonous fans, and we don't need that right now. So and you're all right, Brendan. I mean, he had that. It's kind of hard to remember because we've had a pandemic and so many things
A lot
going
has
on, and
happened. Yeah.
Endgame and all this other stuff, and then the like 6 other MCUs,
Yeah.
like 8 other movies. It's been a while since we've had a Guardians film, but B, we've talked about the fact that James Gunn was fired for some insensitive tweets that
Yeah.
were bad jokes, really
Yep.
bad jokes. Talk about
Very.
that
Yeah.
humor not talk about that humor not working, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I have thoughts about that.
And I think that honestly, I don't even remember him. I mean, maybe you do. Maybe you have him more fresh on your mind because
I don't know. I remember the basic gist of it, which is how I introduced it, basically.
Yeah. And so I was kind of like, I was like, these are like tweets from like years ago. And sometimes, and knowing him, it's kind of like that thing about comedy, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
but it's also the other thing about comedy is like, okay, well, you don't have to say it. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to
Yeah.
tweet it. You know what I mean? And also, scrub your goddamn account. You know what I mean? How about that? But
Mhm.
that being said, the Guardians team really stood for him. It's really interesting that like James Gunn got like essentially fired immediately and from
Yeah.
Marvel, and there's been no response from them about a certain Kang the Conqueror. So that's a
Yeah.
little bit interesting. But that being said, he came back, and honestly, Brendan, to get into this movie,
Mhm.
real quick, and then I'll get it over to you.
Yeah.
I think this movie was surprisingly kind of emotional for me. I connected
Yeah.
with it weirdly enough.
Okay.
Now you could say it's a little bit of manipulation because if you put a bunch of like CGI like cute adorable characters,
Well,
and
I have thoughts on that. Yeah, I have
and
thoughts.
no, I know you have thoughts on it. I've already seen your letterbox.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this will be a fun conversation.
And everything, and I think we can talk about that. I think that there's a lot going on in this movie. Honestly, to
Yeah.
be fair, this is a 2.5 hour film. It feels like a little bit at times, but it also like you're having some sort of finality here for Gunn. He's the guy that's really introduced the weird into the MCU, so he gets to
Sure.
have, I think, carte blanche and a launching point to do whatever he wants. And I am actually surprised. And to go back to what I was saying is that this movie is very dark. This
Yeah.
movie is the darkest entry in the Guardians trilogy. Might be right up there with, I think, like the first hour of Endgame as the darkest stuff we've had in the MCU. Like
Yeah.
it's some really dour scenes and also very traumatizing scenes that we'll talk about with Rocket and his backstory and those characters. But ultimately, very emotional, could be manipulative, like I
Yeah.
said, because of those animals, but I think ultimately very rewarding. I think that guns kind of going out guns a-blazing here. And I think
He's
that
outgunning it. Is that what you're saying?
he's outgunning himself, you know what I mean? And I think that's kind of what I've been missing from these MCU movies since Endgame. A
Sure.
sense of emotionality and tenderness and deeply layered kind of storytelling. Like, I think that if you watch this movie and you go back and watch the other Guardians movies, it really thematically all works, especially Rocket's story, the sort of small scenes that we've had in the first and second one, really, that I've been watching through clips and research for this, but then also
Yeah.
online. They're all connecting back, and that Gunn really has wanted to tell this story for a long, long time. So there is some messiness because of Endgame and especially Infinity War that he has to kind of mine through in order to get the Guardians exactly where they are by the end of this movie. But
Yeah.
ultimately, I think that this is one of the better films in the MCU since post Endgame. I think
Okay.
it's up there with Shang-Chi as the best.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Shang-Chi and No Way Home. I think I joke about John Watts, our future best director winner. But
It's probably gonna happen someday.
it's probably gonna happen, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's got a lot of connections. Oscars are with ABC. It's an inside job.
Yep. Yep.
But anyway, no, I think that those two movies they blend on the sentimental by the end and the familiar and the emotional points, especially with Shang-Chi and his family and Peter and with Aunt May and everything, kind of with that was built up within that quote unquote trilogy, which, by the way, for everyone out there, these aren't trilogies.
There has never
there's
been a trilogy
no
in the MCU. That is my
no
I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but
no, I agree with you.
yeah,
I agree with you.
I will say to your point, the Guardians films are the closest that we've
Yeah.
gotten to having a standalone trilogy within the MCU because they at least have a sense of finality between the three of them on their
Yeah.
own. But no other set of three films have that in the MCU.
And honestly, if you just watch the three Guardians films, you really don't
They
need to
they
watch.
kind of, yeah.
Kind of can get away with it. Like, you know
Yeah,
what I
I
mean?
mean, of course, there's the holiday special, which came out before this, which does have some plot threads that bleed into Volume 3. And, of course, you talked about Endgame. There are things that
Yeah.
happen in both Infinity War and Endgame that are
There's
absolutely needed here, so
which knowing James Gunn comments this past week or 2 weeks ago or whatever in the
yeah.
press run, he did not like what they did,
Yeah,
especially to
you
Gamora.
could tell
He was
his
pissed.
his back was against the wall trying to make that work in this movie.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, you can tell, like, because of that grand story, he has to like backtrack, and I don't think that he would have liked to have had either Gamora die or the fact that like they then bring her back and sort of
Yeah.
cheat code that and then have to do it's a lot. Like, I mean, the fact that the MCU has had to deal with a lot of like the things that those two movies have kind of endured, the blip and
Yeah.
obviously this or various other things, and have chose not to do other things. Like, is that monster from Eternal still hanging out in the sky or whatever?
I hope
Like,
so. I
I mean,
hope
I kind
so.
of hope like that's
I
what
just
Earth
want to see
looks
that be a
like.
random post-credit scene someday, and then there's some plane drives by like, what the heck is this?
Yeah, I kind of want like a shot from space, right?
Yeah.
And then like that thing's just like,
And it's
"Hey
so
guys,
big,
how's it
like all of a
going?"
sudden Earth has a whole new shape to it.
Yeah, I want that. It's like, come on, like I think like at this point, like
we
and we'll
can
talk
call
about
it
this more,
Eternal
but
Earth or something
yeah,
like. There's a
it's
counter Earth in this movie. Let's call it Eternal Earth.
it's really, I mean, what are they doing
I
anyway?
don't know. It's funny.
That being said, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I cannot lie. It got me. I did
Okay.
cry in this movie a couple times, not just once, a couple times. I think that it is because this is, Brendan, the last bit of original Coke recipe MCU that we are going to be having for a long, long time. I think everything else is new Coke. And if
Okay.
you know history, new Coke was not really that successful. And then what happened? It had to go back to calling it Coke,
Yeah.
meaning I think we're going to be going back to Iron Man and Captain America in this
We'll see.
multiverse stuff.
We'll
and
see.
I think that they're going to pay like $100 million to Chris Pratt and Robert Downey Jr. But that's beside the point. That's another
That's beside the point. I don't want to. Yeah, I feel like we can have a 5-hour conversation just speculating with. Maybe we'll do that on episode 533 as we talk about our
maybe we
rankings.
will.
Maybe we'll have some speculation for Phase 5 into Phase 6 and what we think might happen. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that'll happen. You know, it's pretty interesting with regard to James Gunn. If you look at his filmography, doesn't it seem like each film he makes is kind of a representation of what his mood is or what his feelings are? Because The Suicide Squad is a gratuitously mean and angry movie. And it kind of makes sense that it was made at that time after being fired from Guardians and then being brought back. So
I'm going to kill everything you love.
Yeah,
You know
so
what I mean? Like,
there is such a level of frustration to that movie. I'm with you. The Suicide Squad, I don't think really is all that great. I think it gets lost
it's
and
a little messy.
it,
It's got good parts, but like overall, like as a
yeah, I don't even know if it has great parts for me. I think it has a great cast and some decent performances.
that's what I mean. It's
Yeah,
like, Cena's really good, and
Mhm.
who's the girl with the rats?
Oh,
You know what
yeah.
I'm talking about?
I know you're
That
talking about. Great
she was,
question.
and that's how I know how much about the Suicide Squad. The girl with the rats. Like,
Sounds terrible to say,
I'll
but
look.
yeah,
I'll look it up. But
please
yeah,
let's
she
give
was
credit where
great.
credit is due because she was actually pretty good in that movie. But yeah, it's interesting because I do feel like James Gunn's films are a reflection of his psychology in the moment. And I mean, it's a matter of taste, I guess. I tend to prefer James Gunn when he's operating with more sincerity, when he actually seems like he's in a good mood, for lack of a better term, which is why I really enjoy the first two Guardians films. Volume 2, I didn't love when I first saw, but it has now become one of my top 3 favorite MCU movies, and admittedly, it is my favorite film that James Gunn has ever made. Guardians Volume 2.
It rules.
It's great. It's great. And I have a soft spot for Slither. I think that movie's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's good.
I need to rewatch Super, but Super was kind of one of those movies that I feel similarly to The Suicide Squad, just less so. It has a meanness to it that I think works more in that movie than the Suicide Squad does, but there is still an ugliness to that movie that I can't always stomach, which might be the point. So maybe the film is actually working fairly well. But yeah, it's interesting that I feel like his feelings, his headspace is what bleeds into whatever film he's making at the moment, and I feel like that could be the same thing with Guardians Volume 3. And I do want to preface once again by saying that Volume 2 I did not love when I first saw. That's a movie that went way over my head. And I've learned to love it a lot since then. So I say that to say maybe the same thing will happen with me regarding Guardians Volume 3. It could be a grower for me. I do like this movie. It sounds like I'm not as high in it as you are or as most other people seem to be. I was moved by a lot of aspects at the end that I do want to talk about. And what I do love most about this movie, especially when compared to what most of Phase 4 was doing, and of Phase 4 into this being, I guess, Phase 5 now, I do think it is one of the better offerings because it feels very inconsequential within the grander MCU. It's more concerned with its own identity as opposed to the trajectory of Phase 4 or Phase 5. It prioritizes itself as an emotional journey, as you were talking about. The movie is simply about trying to save one of your closest friends. That's basically the plot synopsis. I saw a review for this film. I forget who wrote it, but the headline said the movie is about trying to find your friend some health care. And that's kind of accurate. I mean, it's in a very like jokey kind of tongue in cheek
Right in
kind of
time
way.
for the writer's strike. Who would
Right
have
in
known?
time.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
maybe critics should be writing movies nowadays.
I know, right? Good
But
Lord.
I do like the simplicity of the film. I think really where my biggest problems come into it are some of the things that we were talking about. You know, Gunn being fired from production, being brought back. He worked on another film in the middle of all of this, and of course having to contend with plot threads that Gunn clearly didn't want to have to deal with, like Gamora and Endgame and stuff. And for the record, I actually didn't mind the way Gamora was integrated here. I kind of like the whole will they, won't they joke going at.
Yeah, I just feel like he has to tap into stuff that was like clearly from the first film,
Well,
and
yeah, you could
you know,
tell
have to rebuild it again, and
you could tell it wasn't what he wanted to do, but I kind of like how he played with it in a way where it's like he reoccurred the same will they won't they joke, but I think he crystallized it pretty well. I think where that relationship ends, I'll simply say, is the right move. I think it does a good job there. But given all of those circumstances, the film is kind of a mess. I do think it is a pretty uneven film.
Mm.
And you can kind of feel that there is a sense of compromise here and a lot of maneuvering threads that some really work, some don't always work. Actually, a lot of the stuff involving the High Evolutionary really worked for me.
Yeah.
And you know, as a villain, the High Evolutionary, and I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation of the actor's name. Please
Here we
forgive
go.
me. Chukwudi Iuji. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right,
All
but
right.
please forgive me. But he's quite great in the film, and the character is very underwritten. Like he's kind of a one-dimensional baddie, but there is something kind of refreshing of just having a villain who is just evil for evil's sake.
Hmm.
And it gives the actor a lot of room to play with. So I really like the performance there. Um, and this, despite that thread really working, there are other aspects like involving Adam Warlock, for instance, which feel kind
Mm.
of it feels kind of like a forced in, forgotten thread, honestly.
Well, it feels like the idea that he set up at the end of the last one, and then he's
Yeah.
like, "Oh yeah, that's right, I set that up." Oh, okay.
That
You know
felt
what I
like
mean?
James Gunn kind of dropping the ball on that setup a little bit.
Or honestly, it's kind of smart to just be like, "Oh, they want me to like maybe like make Adam Warlock like a thing maybe for down the
Well,
road. What if they just made
maybe
him like a
going
big
it's
giant idiot?" You know what I
this is
mean?
just maybe it's just an introduction because I feel like we can say the same thing about someone like Wanda Maximoff when we first saw her in Age of Ultron, right?
Yeah.
Now she has become one of the greatest characters in the MCU. But at that
Yep.
point, you might say in a vacuum within Age of Ultron, well, maybe we would have liked to see a little more from her, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The same can be said about, let's say, I don't know, I'll hypothesize here, America Chavez from Doctor Strange
Yeah.
and Multiverse of Madness. In that movie, no, not a very interesting character, very underwritten. But maybe we'll see more of that character that'll help
I
fix those
mean,
issues, right?
Brendan, the perfect example of this too is also I mean, the first Doctor Strange is very hit or miss for people, but
Yeah.
I would argue Stephen Strange over his in-game and Infinity War stuff. And I like Multiverse of Madness a little bit more than
I'm
you
liking it
did.
more as time goes on.
Yeah.
I still don't
Yeah.
love it. I still think that one is too compromised, and I would have loved to see more of the Raimi isms there. But
Yeah. But
I like it more than I did initially.
Strange as a character has become more complex and fascinating. He's
Sure.
one of the, I think, remaining sort of leaders left in the MCU. And but in that first outing, you're like, what the hell are they gonna do with this character? And now
Mhm.
they're like, I would say he is one of the best things about that Infinity War in game
I agree.
um
I agree.
two-parter. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah. I
Him
agree.
and Ant-Man, surprisingly
Actually,
enough.
yeah, yeah. Well, Infinity War, I would say. I mean, it's really more of a Thanos movie.
Yeah.
And I mean, I wish it was even more of a Thanos movie. But the two things about Infinity War I love the most are Thanos and Thor. I
Yeah.
think that's Chris Hemsworth's best performance in the entire MCU is from Infinity
Yeah.
War.
Yeah.
We're getting a little sidetracked here. I want to get back to Guardians Volume 3.
No, it's okay, but you get,
But hey,
but it
it's not
proves
really a
it
rabbit hole. At least we're still within the
no, it
MCU.
proves the point that like just because you get introduced to a character
Sure.
like early on does not mean that that character
Is
won't
going to
be
remain
something
underwritten.
better
Yeah.
down the road.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
exactly.
And honestly, like to have him in here it kind of makes sense. And also it's contained within, once again, this Guardian story, right, Brendan? Because we
Sure.
were introduced in volume 2,
Sure.
sort of not having I'm glad we didn't have like Warlock do like his own thing or have a Disney Plus show. He just kind of gets put in here. Gunn gets to use him the way he wants to, sort of
Yeah.
as like a, I wouldn't say, he's like a side villain or whatever, or anti-hero, or however you want to use it. But
Right.
it's a big dum-dum point as well. But it's I didn't have a problem with it nearly as much as people have. I'm not saying you had a problem with it or anything, but some people have been like a little disappointed. I'm like, yeah, I'll be fine with it. He'll be all
Yeah.
right.
He might be
Like,
all right.
I'm not worried about it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
But it still kind of proves the point that the movie itself is kind of uneven, and I do think there is circumstances behind the scenes that led to the making of it and everything we've talked about there. That it certainly wouldn't have made Gunn's job any easier, right? And you could kind of sense that. I do think it is the worst of the 3 Guardians films. The biggest thing I'm torn on, and you alluded to this, and then I'll toss it back to you, is I am not sure how I feel about the handling of Rocket in this movie. And I think it's less about, because we've talked about this, or many people have talked about this. It's pretty gratuitous. I mean, the term animal torture has been thrown around a lot, and that's not too far off of a description. It's pretty hard to watch at times. That's not the problem I have. I think the problem I have is really more of the narrative flow of it and the overall integration of how it's told, because the Rocket that we know and love from Volume 1, Volume 2, as well as the times that we saw him in Infinity War and Endgame, that Rocket is unconscious for like 90% of this movie. And so then when we keep going back to Rocket's backstory, it's an underdeveloped version of that character that I feel like we haven't gotten to know yet. So I think the way it's told, the flashback nature being as sporadic as it is, it made it hard for me to connect to this prior version of Rocket and his animal friends in those flashbacks. That to me, it started to feel like just an exploitation of the Bambi effect. And I feel like, I'm not saying this is why people are reacting so emotionally to Rocket's story here. But in the case of me, I found myself feeling moved and saddened by Rocket's backstory simply because I saw the animals as cute. And I don't think that works. Again, this is really the element that is holding me back from loving this movie. If I can come around on this, and maybe I will, because history has shown that I've come around on a previous Guardians movie before, that will be the saving grace for me. If I come around on Rocket's story and I'm able to sense that synergy between the Rocket we already know and how that connects to the Rocket that was before Rocket. You know what I mean? So I think there's a disconnect there in how it's told. I almost feel like it should have been its own separate like prologue that all worked connectedly into this story, and I think that's what this kind of needed. But maybe I'll come around to it. So it keeps me from loving the film, but it's nice to see a movie in the MCU nowadays that at least wears its heart and sincerity more on its sleeve than a lot of these others. So I'll take the messiness of this one over some of the more corporately mandated ones. Like I mentioned being a defender of Quantumania, but I like this movie more than Quantumania. I mean, easily, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'll take something like this over that, even if it doesn't maybe flow as consistently. But I prefer movies that at least take a chance like this.
So I think that when I say that they let like James Gunn just kind of cook and do whatever he wants here, I think that the Rocket stuff is exactly a pinpoint, sort of exact beacon of where they are letting him just do whatever he wants.
Well, you could tell Rocket's his favorite character, right? In fact, I think he has said that in interviews.
I think that it's been clear from the beginning.
Perhaps.
Honestly.
Actually, yeah, good point. Yeah, just go back to Volume 1. Yeah, that's pretty obvious.
I think
You're right.
he emotionally has been the most complex character overall in the 3 films. I think that the one thing that you want to say, if you want to call these self-contained, you can, but I think that Gunn's talked about, obviously the stuff that like he had to work against because of Infinity War and Endgame.
Yeah.
One of the benefits of Infinity War and Endgame was Rocket, and
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
Rocket's maturity and his sense of loss and his
Yeah.
sense of longing to have his family back, and his desperation to try to get the Guardians back because he's, that's his family.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
hadn't had a family since the events of what we see here. And I think that they have teased this enough
Mm-hmm.
that I think that Gunn was going to tell this story one way or another. Now, I think that I agree with you, Brendan. I think that splice back and forth through the film and kind of losing the momentum of the sort of chase
Yeah.
sequence or the quest sequence of a Guardians film,
Mm-hmm.
right? And going back and forth, it is a bit of at times it can be a little jarring to go back and forth, and you lose a little bit of momentum because
Yeah.
it's weird to have like Peter Quill and the Guardians trying to save his life and having all these quippy jokes and the stuff we love about the Guardians, right?
Yeah.
And then going back to like this mood piece, that's over here.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if putting it all at the beginning maybe is the right move either, because of the fact that like that's like we almost have like 30 minutes of footage, it feels like here. So it
I
would
don't
be
think it's that much actually. Like
it
I mean,
feels like a lot.
it feels like a well, but then again, I feel like
because
that's
it's spread out. You know what I mean?
that's the
probably the
illusion of
nature
movie
it.
making and narrative storytelling
Yeah.
like that. That when you break it,
Um,
it's like when you notice someone like someone like Anthony Hopkins only having what 10 or 11 minutes of screen time in Silence of the Lambs,
yeah,
but it
it's
seems
spread
like
out,
so
yeah.
much more because it's so spread out, right?
No, that's true. But I think that to get to some of the like emotional moments in the film, particularly what happens with Rocket towards the end,
Mhm.
maybe I don't know how you would redo it. I'm not James Gunn, and I'm
Well,
not going to try to do that. But
yeah,
I think that that's kind of like a futile exercise, because what we got was what we got, and we can't go back and
right.
we can't
We can't go back
I
and
mean,
change it. You're right.
I can't go back and change it, and I know that some fans honestly probably wouldn't. And
Mhm.
what we got here, though, I think substance wise, regardless of how it was put together, substance wise, Brendan, is I agree. It's very hard to watch,
Mhm.
very uneasy. I mean, I don't think I don't think he's trying to make like cute animals and then try to like screw them up or whatever.
No,
I think he's
he's
speaking
certainly
to a
not.
larger
He's
theme.
not condoning this kind of stuff. He's not
No,
condoning animal cruelty.
he's speaking to a larger theme of that nothing's perfect. You know what I mean? And it's in the imperfections is where you find humanity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And he's talked about this, I think, in the Guardians films. I think that that's where like ego, Kurt Russell's character from the last film also
Yeah.
kind of ties into this as well. I think also
Yeah.
too Ronan ties into this as well. And I
Yeah.
think all these villains are kind of tying in perfectly together to this theme. And it all ties back to his favorite character, which is Rocket, which is essentially something that is perfectly innocent and perfectly fine and has an end date and has sort of a expiration date or whatever,
Mhm.
and doesn't need to be made to the perfect essence. But if you destroy the innocence, it can become a cold and sort of cynical world. And we see it in the film too, is that like in order to make this paradise, there is imperfections. And that's what
Uh-huh.
what is the character's name again?
The high
The bad
evolutionary.
guy?
Yeah.
High evolutionary. Sorry,
Yeah. Well, yeah,
that's
and
a
his whole counter
mouthful.
Earth, as it's called.
Yes, it's you see the crumbling of it when they arrive on his planet of like you see the suburbia, but then there's the inner city drug trafficking, and then there's the poverty, and then there's
Yeah.
all these other things. And his solution is, well, let's just destroy the planet and go to the next thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, no, like nothing is perfect, and so, you know, using all these levels up and up and up and up, and also kind of talking about animal testing
Yeah.
and all these different things. that Gunn is trying to talk here. It's not going to be a pretty sight. It like this stuff is not a pretty sight. It's to me, this is probably one of the more like political films. It was funny. Like there's this
Yeah, a little bit.
there, it's preaching a message here. You know what I mean? A little bit. And
I
it's
guess.
doing
Yeah.
it with probably like the most famous character. Also, too, like I understand a little bit why probably Rocket isn't used as much here because a certain actor that's playing him is potentially directing his own second feature. It probably didn't have a lot of time to get into the booth or whatever,
Maybe. Yeah.
but and they had to use a couple of other younger actors to play Rocket. So I get why, wink, wink, they had to kind of go down this route a little bit too. But I also think too is that the lingering question for the Guardians has always been Rocket's sort of angry
There
exterior
two
surrounding
two
him.
stories two stories that these movies were always alluding to. One was Rocket's backstory, the other was Peter Quill's father, right?
Yeah. And they answered one in the
yeah,
last, and
yeah.
then they were going to answer it this way. Now, I will agree with you a little bit that I thought that the conclusion of that sort of backstory was was just so like of course, like that's exactly how that ends for him to go, and it's the
Well,
really
that's
the
exactly
only
how James Gunn normally ends moments like that, right? That was
yeah
a very James Gunn narrative choice.
yeah, and that's also like just the choice of like a lot of superhero or a lot of movies to just go down that route. It's very easy.
Mhm.
It's and everything, but I thought there's a sequence in this movie too. I thought back of a movie entirely out of this entire franchise, and I thought of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, where that was sort
Oh.
of ripped right out of.
Interesting.
And because it literally looks like the exact same place. If in
Oh,
that film where
okay.
that sequence happens in this one, I was like,
Interesting.
okay, I know where we're going with this, and it's almost beat for beat that. But I think that while that's going on, and I think that while I make that joke, though, there is a lot of really sincereness, and that's where I think the emotionality got me,
Okay.
Brendan, where I was watching that scene, and you have like these characters that you've been sort of spliced through, and you don't think that, and you don't think that you're getting attached to them, and then it's just opposing back to Quill and the Guardians on the ship trying to save Rocket. And I thought that moment where it
Yeah.
was cut back and forth, I was like, okay, this is where I understand why they wanted to do it. It's at probably its peak emotionally speaking, towards I think also the end, like one of the final climactic battle sequences too.
Yeah.
I thought it weirdly worked for me.
Okay.
I'm not
Yeah.
and I think that like I think that if you're just speaking character wise and emotionality,
Mhm.
without getting really into spoilers, it's essentially you're losing one family to go back to another. And
Mhm.
I thought Gunn, while I agree with you, it's a little bit of a bumpy ride to get there. I thought to get to when you get to that moment, I'm like, oh wow,
Yeah.
he connected a thread there that I didn't think about, but wow,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
actually very poignant.
you first off, you make a great point about how some of these other movies in this quote unquote trilogy do inadvertently maybe connect back to Rocket in some ways. I think that's a pretty interesting observation. And then you talk about the way that his backstory is told and how it unfolds in the confines of this movie, specifically Volume 3 here. And I think that's where I'm still struggling a little bit because I guess I was hoping to, and maybe this is where a rewatch will help me, right?
Mm.
I was hoping to sense a little bit more of, okay, so if we're going to make a specific flashback at this particular moment, how does that parallel something
Yeah.
that's happening in the present at that specific moment? And then doing it again and, continuing that kind of trajectory.
Well,
And I wasn't
I
sure if I was
yeah.
sensing that.
Yeah, I think that that's just mostly coming down to the fact that the clock is ticking. I think it's more of a clock metaphor. I think of anything,
which is
because
interesting because it didn't add
know
much urgency to me. It kind of
no, it doesn't.
away.
It doesn't. But I think that's what he's kind of going for. I agree with you. It's not the choice I would have made to do that. But
Yeah.
but I think that by the end, you do feel that urgency. That's what I'm saying.
I do a
It's
little,
like,
yeah, I do a little bit. I think a
um,
lot of the other characters are helping to provide additional emotionality there too. Like
yeah,
we haven't really talked much about the rest of the
no,
returning cast here.
we haven't.
But yeah, I'll just single two people out specifically. But Dave Bautista is fantastic here.
Yeah,
Karen Gillan as Nebula, I think, is also, and then of course, Chris Pratt as Peter Quill, Star-Lord. I actually think he's very good here too. So if there is any lingering emotionality by the end, especially involving Rocket, it's how we believe that these other characters care for this other creature, right? And I think that's what helps sells it too. I just couldn't help but sit there and think, man, if we got a full prologue of Rocket's backstory like that, and then that hard, like uh that devastation, hard cuts to the opening credits of him singing to Radiohead's Creep, would
mhm,
have been the best transition I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe has ever given us.
mm,
And because we'll talk about the soundtrack in a little bit, but
yeah,
I do like the sense of melancholy that the opening credits provide. It really cues us in that this is going to be a very different movie.
yeah,
And I think it could have hit even harder if James Gunn maybe just took the chance, or if Disney let him take the chance to say,
yeah.
let's just devastate these people, and then we devastate them even further with Tom York's crooning. It's
Well, I think also too, though, Brendan, you would have had that like at the front, and
yeah,
then you would have had those sequences with Rocket, where he gets to that sort of state,
yeah.
and then there would have been an entire chunk of that movie where he's gone.
But
You
I
know what I
think at
mean?
least we would have, had a sense of Rocket's presence in this movie more
Yeah,
by having a full, narrative thread in the beginning. But I don't know.
yeah,
Maybe that's just, I don't know. We haven't seen that movie. I'm just speculating. So
yeah. No,
I
and
would.
I think
I mean, if we ever tested it and we ever made like an in-session cut of the film and doing that, maybe it might look like crap. It might be
maybe,
terrible.
maybe it wouldn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Narratively speaking, how do you, I mean, sure.
Hmm.
Also, yeah. James Gunn is, man, he's really, when you think about the needle drop, you mentioned that, like, to start it off with Creep, I was like, all right,
And it's an acoustic
okay,
version of Creep. It's not even the full
yeah.
version of it.
No, I was like, all right,
I mean, even
okay,
when the title of the movie appears, it doesn't even like the song "Creep" has. It's not one of my favorite Radiohead songs. I'm not a big fan of it
no,
personally, but
no,
um,
it's it's not the best one, but I
yeah.
understand why to use it.
Oh
Actually,
yeah, for
to
sure.
use it here was actually really smart.
Well, I
Like, I
love
was,
the rendition of it too. That it's just Tom York and an acoustic guitar. The entire
yeah,
band is stripped back, so
very
the song
booty.
is very
Yeah.
much known for this
I'm glad that
crescendo.
made
That
the iPod.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
it's known for this crescendo that it reaches at the end of the song, right?
Yeah,
The full band coming in and really turning into a hard rock kind of environment, but all of that's gone. And when the title appears, it's just Tom York and an acoustic guitar screaming that lyric, and
yeah.
it's really strange. It's almost anticlimactic, right?
Mhm.
And I kind of like that. I think it's a really interesting tonal subversion.
Yeah, I wish, like, I think some of the needle drops work in the film like that. I think some of
Yeah.
them don't.
It's not the best soundtrack of the three. I'll say
No,
that.
no, it's the weakest soundtrack out of the three. I would honestly like Volume 2 soundtrack.
That's my favorite soundtrack of the three. I mean,
Volume 2 is just my favorite of the three. And
yeah,
I do like this movie. I think because of the emotional stakes a little bit more than one. I'm
yeah.
still not a big fan of Volume 1, as many people
Oh,
are.
that's interesting. Yeah. So you
Yeah,
like this one more than Volume One as a movie?
a little bit, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I
Okay.
mean, like, I got this at like 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. And I'm the one
Sure.
defending it. You know what I mean? I think you have it at like 3. So
I have it.
it's
I
like,
have it at
that
3.
half star really made a
The
difference.
half star does. I mean,
It really
it kind of
does.
does when you're in the
It
3
really
to
does.
3.5 range, right? That's kind of the biggest separator between. Well, actually, really, the biggest separator is when you get to 2.5 out of 5, right? Because
Yeah,
then you have to start deciphering if it's a quote unquote positive or negative review, right?
yeah. Because I think
Yeah.
like I like all the Rocket stuff here. I think
Okay.
it's great. I think that the Adam Warlock and Elizabeth Debicki sort of stuff. I think that that's very undercooked,
Agreed.
and
Agreed.
and I think that, and again, that's just, I think that I think that that's undercooked. But then the high evolutionary stuff's actually pretty good.
Yep.
But then, um, I think that the Gamora stuff obviously is working up against a hill,
Yeah.
and it doesn't all the way click until towards the end for me. I think like
The
most of the time
resolution of that, I think, is very good. I'll say that.
it's very good, but like also it's a little bit like we're
Kind of spinning
like,
wheels there, and
yeah,
yeah.
spinning wheels to get there, and feels like we've done this before with this group, and we kind of have. But I agree with you. I think like Karen Gillan's great. I think
Yeah.
Batista's just great
I
in
have
this
to
movie.
I have to do so a little inside baseball as we're recording this.
Yeah.
JD just texted me as we're doing this right now, and he
Mm.
said we are required to say this one quote on this review, and it's involving the character of Drax.
Okay.
And it is one of the best lines in the movie.
Yeah.
And it's you weren't made to be a destroyer, you were meant to be a dad.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I bet JD was like dead in the theater next to Sam.
Well, I think JD loved this movie. He tweeted that he cried quite a bit. So
yeah,
it sounds like he might be the highest of even the three of us on this one.
No,
so,
it's I was sitting there, I was like, God, that's how you understand your characters and understand your
Drax's resolution here is my favorite part of the ending. There are two moments of the ending that did bring me to tears, and it's the one involving Drax and the one involving Peter Quill. I'll simply say that. I think the way that resolves itself, I think, was a nice tie into the first movie. I'll simply say. And I do think Chris Pratt handles it pretty well. There's like a sense of almost like insecurity in him because he's very much a fish out of water once again in a place where he shouldn't be. So there's a lot of interesting irony there.
Yeah, I thought Mario was really good in the movie too.
Oh yeah, I still didn't see the Mario movie yet.
I still haven't, and
I have not contributed to its $1 billion raise.
I'm not. Yeah, I don't need to contribute. It's fine.
I'm kind of curious to see it though.
I am. I know. I know some people that are still going to see it this week, and I'm like, really? That's what you're going to go see? Anyway,
wow.
Yeah. I want to shout out someone, and I thought that was actually really good too here, and that's Pong Kilatif. I'm probably
and that's another name we can't pronounce it.
As man, by the way, also it's Daniela Melancourt is
from the Suicide Squad, right? Yeah.
Wanted to get back to that. We got deep dived into that. So if you're looking for that extra, folks, it comes at the 47-minute mark of this show. But
we kept our promise. We kept our promise.
Honestly, for like a character that kind of got thrown in the second Guardians, and I guess that I never watched the holiday special for Guardians, to be fair, but
interesting.
I heard her and Drax had a lot more to do in there and builds up their rapport a lot more. But I thought she was great in this. It was really interesting that this was the first kind of mention that she's like Quill's half sister, and
that was a huge revelation in the holiday special.
Okay.
That was like, I mean, in many ways, like the holiday special was it felt like a two-purpose exercise. The first purpose just to be a fun little holiday special and throw Kevin Bacon into the mix, and the second thing was to reveal that Mantis is Peter Quill's half sister.
I mean, like I didn't watch it, but I kind of got it because like Egos essentially created her.
So I mean,
I kind of got that, but at the same token, I'm like, Brendan, this is my problem with the MCU, and it is that if somebody misses one little thing, then you're like, for a half second there, I was in the theater, I was like,
I'm willing, to your point though, Ryan, I'm willing to argue that the holiday special still remains relatively inconsequential when compared to the rest of these movies. And that's primarily because you just said it. It's kind of easy to decipher that Mantis is Peter Quill's half sister because of her origins. So
but I'm also a 31-year-old that's seen all the damn films.
And you're also
your audience member.
You're also smart. You're also smart enough to not have things completely mentioned to you in order to get it. Because in the holiday special, it's like a direct conversation like, oh, you are my half sister. It is so literal in that regard.
Put it in quotes. You know what I mean? No, I get that. And but I was sitting here and going like, honestly, until the other day when I saw it, I forgot about I forgot about
It
this
is, yeah.
holiday
It's
special.
actually weird for a big development like that in the holiday special. It's just kind of brushed over here.
Yeah, it's like, and I was like, what the hell? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And but like, I was in the middle of I was sitting in the middle of this movie. I'm like, oh, I guess they must have, like, yeah, I guess he's just gonna write that in. And that was one of the, I honestly figured it was like, well, he really wanted them to kind of hit on this maybe in Infinity War, and they didn't
Yeah.
really do that. So he's
Yeah.
added here. And I was like, all right, okay,
I guess
cool.
so. I guess so.
I guess we're doing that.
Yeah.
But but I thought she was really good.
She
Yeah,
is good here. Yeah.
Karen Gillan, great in
Yeah.
here as
Really great.
well.
Yeah.
Honestly, Cooper is really good. Like, I mean, like,
Yeah, he's good.
is it crazy that we kind of just forget that Bradley Cooper is Rocket Raccoon? Is it
Oh, yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I feel like of all the characters in the MCU, all the stars, all the people that play their characters, and maybe it's just because we don't see them, but
Well,
we
it's
forget that
yeah.
this man has been playing a raccoon for 10 years.
And it's the voice.
Right?
It's the way he manipulates his voice, which is that could have been easy to do in post-production, but you go back to the making of the first Guardians of the Galaxy and you look at like Vin Diesel and Bradley Cooper in the recording booth, and the way Bradley Cooper is throwing his voice to sound like Rocket, it's mostly all him. And
Yeah. And Vin's like, I'm Groot. All right,
yeah,
where's the check?
in every
I gotta
single
go to the
language.
fast set. You know, I gotta go to the fast set. What's going on?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No, I agree, because like I'm, but honestly, you can tell that that's Vin Diesel's voice.
Oh, you can.
Honestly,
That's kind of the
like,
point.
that's
Yeah.
the kind of the point.
Yeah.
But like no, it's like I was watching something on YouTube, and he was there at the LA premiere or whatever, and I was like, is that the first time he's actually gone to one of those things? Like, like I don't like think I've ever seen him go to one of these Marvel things, and it makes sense because like the character's sort of having like a big send off here or a big moment.
Yeah,
it's very focused on him. He's actually in a lot of ways the main character.
Yeah, it is.
On camera and off camera.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
it's kind of a Rocket movie in that regard.
Yeah, it's gone away from being Quill's story in the first two to definitely being about Rocket.
Yeah,
even though I think they kind of share it in the second film a little bit. But anyway,
they do.
I was just like, oh my God, here's Bradley Cooper, director of A Star Is Born, billion-time Oscar nominee, never won anything, and he's Maestro himself, and like he's literally just like, yeah, I'm here to like celebrate James Gunn and Rocket, and I kind of always forget that he's a part of this.
Yeah,
and so but yeah, I think you're right about Chris Pratt. I know I joke with him, but he actually, you know, I know okay, personal speaking aside from personal life, if we're talking about Chris Pratt as Star-Lord or working with good talent, he's actually a very, very solid actor. I wouldn't say great or good.
I think he can. I think he can be great.
I think he has the potential because he's really good here.
I think he's. I mean, I think he's great in Volume 2.
Yeah,
and I know it's a vocal
this character perfectly.
It's a vocal performance in something like this, but I also think he's great in the Lego Movie, for instance.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's good in the Jurassic movies at all.
No, because there's no good directors or a good screenplay in sight.
Which is so unfortunate because they had a good director for the second one, and it was very much compromised.
Yeah, because of Book Henry.
I don't hate Book Henry. I don't hate it.
I know you don't. Evidently, Disney did enough to not give him a Star Wars.
Yeah.
So
I don't want to talk about that.
I know, but no, I think that it's a good movie. Honestly, Brendan, it's nice to see emotional payoffs. It's nice to see good action sequences. I will say clear action sequences. I thought that the visual effects in this movie were a heck of a lot better than a lot of the previous Marvel entries.
Yeah, well,
including Ant-Man.
Quantumania. I agree. They're more inventive here. Probably my favorite set piece was the heist sequence on this what was that planet called again?
Oh,
But it
God.
was basically like a giant jellyfish, is what they were
Yeah,
breaking into.
it was like a jellyfish sort of human thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was pretty good.
And I think maybe part of it, and I'm going back to the soundtrack for a brief moment. And while I said this is my least favorite of the soundtracks for all three of them, there are at least three needle drops that really worked for me. And one of them is playing Space Hogs in the meantime as they land on this planet to perform this heist. I thought that really worked, and maybe it's just because I love the song. But I thought, as far as set pieces go, that was my favorite one.
That was a good set piece. Um I thought that the Groot Star Lord escape plan sort of sequence,
Yeah,
that gunfight here, I actually thought that was really fun and really funny. And also,
that was a good pull of the rug. Yeah, I'm with you.
yeah, and I just love the way that he like put different um people together in this film and different sections of the Guardians together, and allowed a lot. I think that at times the movie is really funny. I think it's
Yeah,
really moving. I think that overall it's just like a really fun time, and I've missed that in the MCU. I'm glad to see it back, if only for a short amount of time, Brendan, because
yeah,
I don't think that this this is going to be a recurring theme going forward, because this the Guardians are an original, phase 2 entity that were created. They are the inventors of the weird. We don't get Doctor Strange, we don't get
mhm,
Shang-Chi, we don't get Miss Marvel. We don't get all these things if Guardians aren't a hit
yeah,
and don't work. And going forward, it's going to be a real shame not to see Gunn sort of helming behind the camera and working with these characters again. But it's going to be a really interesting seeing where they go forward with these characters. I know
yeah.
that everyone's talking about like this being an ending for the Guardians as we know. I don't buy any of
I
that.
don't buy it
I've
either.
never bought any
It's
of that.
more of an ending for James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's
It's
really
it's an ending for him
yeah.
as the shepherd of these characters. But
Yeah. Now,
I'm telling you,
granted, that doesn't mean that there is not a sense of closure and finality regarding this group of
yeah, I think this
ragtaggers.
story is
Yeah,
closed.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the Guardians will return and continue for sure. But without getting into spoilers, I'll say this: it won't be the same.
No,
That's at least there's going to be a difference between the Guardians going forward as opposed to the Guardians we saw in this James Gunn trilogy.
I don't know. I think give it a King Dynasty or a Secret Wars in the future,
Mm,
and they'll you know how like Thor appears in Infinity War, or like there's the big portal sequence
yeah,
in Endgame. They'll all
yeah.
come right back together, right, and run on the battlefield together, and you'll be like, of course. And then
And they'll
and
hug and
everybody
go
in the
and sing
theater,
"Kumbaya."
yeah, and everybody will scream, and you'll be like, "Hey, can you keep it down? I'm trying to watch a movie here." So that's
We
exactly what's
know
going on.
Marvel is all about creating those audience reactions, right? That's what
They
they live
literally
for.
put audible pauses in their
They
movies,
do. You're right. You're not
and
wrong.
I
It's the
freaking hate that.
well,
I
especially
hate that.
especially if you see it in a
Spider-Man was the worst
well,
in my
especially when you see it in a setting where like let's say you go at a time that's very awkward and there's maybe only like 4 or 5 people in the theater and it's you could sense the breath being taken way too long.
not even that, when you're just watching them at home by yourself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, just take it there. Like, watch Spider-Man No Way Home at home.
Yeah.
All
I
right?
will say, as far as those pauses you're talking about, Endgame did it well because you
Yeah.
had Alan Silvestri's
Just
awesome
score.
score
Yeah, the
filling in
score.
those gaps.
Yeah, score can help that. That's
Yeah.
something you might want to include. But no, I just, I know we'll probably talk about this more on the main show, but I am
Mhm.
fascinated. And I know we talked about this a little bit before with the state of the MCU, and it's really
Mhm.
funny how a lot of what I said is kind of seeming to be coming true.
Yeah.
Maybe Marvel should hire me. But
Look at you, this
not
forecaster
saying they
over here.
are. So if you're on YouTube and you think I'm being bought by Marvel, You freaking
No.
wish, because then I wouldn't have a mortgage.
They
It would be
they
paid off.
have that kind of money, but they're not willing to spend that kind of money.
Yeah, they're not. They don't want it
No.
that bad.
No.
But no, I think that it's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good, fun effort. Good way to kick off the summer.
Yeah, I'm more or less with you, and I'm willing to give this film another chance. I don't know if I'll see it again in the theater. I'll probably wait until it's available on Disney Plus, to see if it holds up for me even better on rewatches. Because I wouldn't be surprised if it does. Volume 2 was the same thing with me, and maybe I'll see some threads and nuances that I missed on that first go around with regard to the storytelling and how Rocket's backstory is interwoven, as we were talking about. But yeah, I do like the existence of this one and how it does wear its heart more on its sleeve than others. And you could tell that James Gunn cares, and that's a good thing. And hopefully we see more of that going forward. Great conversation here on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. If you want to see some more thoughts from us, we'll eventually have some thoughts on our Letterboxd page at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm. You can also let us know your thoughts by emailing us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com or hit us up on social media. We really do appreciate it. That'll do it for this review here, Ryan. Thanks for joining me this morning. It didn't sound like our voices got very bassy. We actually got
I'm
pretty
gonna get real low.
get real low. All of a sudden, it sounds like you're
I'm gonna
singing a
start singing
club
that
anthem
Vin Diesel.
there.
Yeah, I'm gonna start singing that Vin Diesel song. You know what I'm talking about? Have you ever heard that?
I don't know if I have.
You haven't heard Vin Diesel sing that pop song that came out?
I don't know. I don't really
like this, and he's talking like you.
I don't really follow
Yeah,
Vin
that's-
Diesel that much.
I gotta tell you, it's a bop. You'd love it,
Okay, well,
Brendan.
I
I'm gonna
like a
send
good
it
bop.
to you.
Okay,
If
all
you
right.
wanna go out there, I'm gonna hang on. We're not ending this review until I find this song, so everybody can go listen to it. So
Oh
just
my
hang
gosh.
on.
Okay.
We
So
got
then
it.
I guess I'll just keep the momentum going. So there's no awkward gaps like there were in No Way Home, like you were saying.
Feel Like I Do. It's with it's Vin Diesel singing a song. The song came out. I kid you not. Oh shoot, I don't want to play it.
No, don't play
The
it.
song came out in the suspense is killing everyone during the pandemic, and it is a bop. So Feel Like I Do. It's everything you think it will be,
Mhm.
and it's awesome.
Okay. All right.
Because it's literally like if he was just talking into the mic, and it's
Mhm.
great.
Well, here we are assigning homework on the InSession Film podcast.
I'm saying it's from one family to the next family because we'll be talking about Vin Diesel in 2 weeks.
Oh
So.
gosh, yeah. Oh God. He loves his family. He loves his family. He loves his family. Family's good. But yes, great conversation here, Ryan. Really do appreciate you taking some time this morning to talk about some Guardians Volume 3. A few plugs here before we get out of here. We talked about episode 533 also coming out around this same time. Ryan and I will be reconvening to talk a bit more about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It'll be a very loose conversation, not as structured as some of our other episodes, or at least our episodic main shows specifically. But we'll be giving an updated ranking of the MCU, maybe not the entire MCU, but just like maybe a top 10, maybe into the top 20, and see where we disagree the most and just have a fun conversation there, and maybe crystallize the whole show by speculating a little bit of what we expect to see with Phase 5 and maybe into Phase 6. So be on the lookout for that in episode 533. And if you haven't already listened to episode 532, all four of us, you, me, Ryan, and then Jay and JD all got together to do a collective ranking of the Walt Disney Animated Studios golden and silver eras.
Yeah.
And if you watch that on YouTube, you'll see some physical violence happen when we talk about Sleeping Beauty.
That was wild. And then also you'll see someone's heartbreak in The Sword and the Stone special. Heartless, I say.
If you want to hear why we're referring to it like that, you can go and check out episode 532. It was a lot of fun. Ryan, thanks for joining me on this Guardians-filled escapade. Really do appreciate it. And for everyone listening, we will see you all next time on the InSession Film Podcast.
Feel Like I Do. Vin Diesel. Listen to it.
I'm hooked on a feeling.